Words can separate and divide, but words can also create connection.
Yeah.
And that's what intimacy is. Intimacy is closeness and connection. Intimacy isn't just sex.
Yeah.
Intimacy isn't just, spirituality.
Yeah.
Closeness and connection. And for me, in relationships, whether it's mother-father or father and child or lover or caregiver or whatever, there's only two options. We're either moving towards connection or we're moving towards disconnection. And that becomes a choice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Openly Human Show. I'm joined today by Miss Priya Patel. She is a relationship, sex, and intimacy coach. I'm really excited about this episode because, as per our discussions before between me and Priya, we have a lot in common in terms of our desire to know about spirituality and our desire to help people. So, without further ado, Priya, I just wanted to get to know a little bit more about your background and what took you to where you are today.
What a loaded question.
Exactly.
I think for myself, it's very much like a lot of other people where it is you help yourself first. And as soon as you figure that out, for me, it was I must help others. So for me, it began with a crisis and completely rock bottom, life falling apart, suicidal. And feeling very, very alone and not really sure what to do and very disconnected, not only from who I was, but from the world around me. And, from that place, realizing there was a turning point of a choice and maybe even a spiritual experience that said, okay, it's time to help yourself. And so I did.
Okay, so like most people, like even now when I've gone through the rough periods in life, that's when I've noticed that change begins, right? You hit rock bottom and there's nowhere to go but up. So that's basically the approach you took, right? Because most people, they become escapists. They like to run away from their problems.
Yeah, I think for me it was really truly a matter of life or death. I saw no other option. And when I say life or death, I had realized at the age of 34, I was not really living. Sure, I had the marriage and the house and the career, but I wasn't really living. The amount of unhappiness inside of me and pain and unhealed experiences that were not even really realized of how much the impact of that was playing out in my actual daily life came to a head. And it was almost like if anybody else experiences this, where you wear these masks because it's how you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to present yourself or act. And I became really exhausted of playing these roles and these parts, but I played them so well. Nobody would ever have even known that inside I was feeling very challenged or experiencing a ton of suffering inside. Not a human being would have known, not my mother, not my father, not my friends, not my family, not my coworkers. It was almost like silent suffering.
And since you've been through something like that, out of curiosity, is that something we do intentionally, that we try to hide our true like pains from
Pain.
other people?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think a lot of it depends on how you've been raised, your culture, what is the relationship, what's been modeled for you. Being that I'm an Indian woman raised in an Indian patriarchal system, there's a lot of like martyrdom. I think that's modeled from generation to generation to generation to generation. And that was true for me. It's almost like you don't show. Even if something's going on, I felt like I had learned watching aunts and cousins, maybe my own even parents, of you just suck it up and you don't tell others. And you kind of, so I would say, not that it was on purpose, but I do feel like I was taught to hide it.
Yeah, that's a setback of, I guess, our culture and many other cultures, right, where they are patriarchal, and especially women are told to hold back their emotions, their feelings, their experiences, and even guys to some extent. Even in a
A
patriarchal
lot.
society, we hold back so
It's
much.
men and women, you're
Yeah.
not wrong.
Hmm.
Men too, you know. So many people aren't given permission really to experience, to explore their feelings. And when you have life experiences that are hard or challenging,
Hmm.
they are going to create feelings. And what happens then is we are suppressing and suppressing and suppressing and suppressing. And over time, what happens? That builds up in our own body
Hmm.
and our mind. And so our subconscious mind is carrying all of these experiences, though we may think that we've moved on,
Hmm.
or we might think, no big deal, I'm
Yeah.
going to get over it. But have we really done the work to
Hmm.
be with the actual impact of those experiences? It ends up in our body, and we become often very sick,
Yeah.
holding on to this stored and stuck energy. And so my journey was I can no longer, not another second, not another moment of my
Hmm.
life with this much conviction.
Yeah.
Can I continue to live the way that I was living? Everything must change.
Hmm.
Complete death of who I was,
Hmm.
and to be reborn in moment to moment to moment. And that's when I realized, oh my God, that's the Eastern practice.
Yeah.
It's the Eastern practice that every moment is an opportunity for death and birth and death and birth and death and birth.
Hmm.
And that's the way that I live today.
So, you mentioned how you do inner work. Now, that inner work, it's obviously, is it, can it be said that it's across the board for everyone? It's the same inner work, and there's set
Absolutely.
structures? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like one of the biggest things that came my way was I was extremely disconnected from my body.
Hmm.
And I started Googling, like, how do you reconnect to your body?
Hmm.
Like, I couldn't feel my hands or feet, disassociation. And yoga came up.
Due to trauma, I'm
Trauma,
guessing that
yeah.
that
Tremendous amount of trauma.
Oh, okay.
Disassociation pop was like my norm.
Mm.
I was more comfortable being out of my body than in my body.
Mm.
More comfortable in that place. So I Googled yoga, I Googled that, and yoga came up. And I had practiced yoga as a young adult,
Hmm.
but 20 years had gone by
Yeah.
or so. And I no longer was practicing. And I was like, okay, well, let me go back to yoga. And there, they started doing these spiritual talks before class.
Okay.
And so I started to then realize, oh, yoga is so much more than the physical practice that you see, or the yoga pants, or the
The
really cool
acrobatics of it.
mat. Yeah, the
Yeah.
acrobatics of it.
Yeah.
And I would find myself going back to this class just to hear the 5-minute talks. And
Mm.
that's when I realized, oh my God, there's so much more. And I went down the path of studying the philosophy of yoga across the East, across Japan, Thailand, and India,
Mm.
studying Eastern philosophy. And what I realized is yoga is the journey of the self through the self to the self. So it's
Mm.
about the self. And so is this inner work that you're talking about, is
Hmm.
it for everybody? Absolutely.
Okay.
Because it's about the journey to who we are.
Okay, so it's amazing how you've learned to mix all these philosophies, because me being from India and being raised in an Indian household, Hinduism was a big thing, and our philosophy, I believe it's very encompassing of all the things that philosophy has talked about, but we ignore other Eastern philosophies like Japan and Buddhism and or Chinese
Mhm.
philosophy, right? So it's amazing how you blended all that together and you came up with whatever you coach people with. And what specifically do you end up coaching people on, like how to deal with
Mm.
anxieties or?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. So the thing that I feel that I am most known for
Hmm.
is for helping individuals be more human.
Mm.
It's really amazing, the name of your podcast,
Oh, yes, openly
because
human, yeah. Hmm.
exactly, because I feel like I said, I was wearing all of the masks and the projections and the perceptions of who I think I was supposed to
Hmm.
be for my culture, for my family, for my gender. And so a lot of what I'm doing is helping most people come back to their most authentic self. And we're looking at the root causes of their behavior patterns, which are creating ruptures in their relationships or
Hmm.
ruptures in their lives or ruptures within. So I'm blending trauma recovery, Eastern philosophy, and I'm a somatica trained sexologist, which is relationship, sex, and intimacy. And so I went through a program for that. So people are coming to me for all kinds of things. Maybe there's cheating happening in the marriage, or maybe there's rupture between a mother and a daughter that hasn't been healed from childhood trauma, and it's affecting their relationship today. And we're working on the root of the cause, and we're healing those moments through practices and interactions, and from then giving them the tools and developing the capacity to sit with themselves. And mostly what I mean by that is to sit with the big, overwhelming emotions, such as disappointment or feeling dismissed or feeling abandoned or neglected or feeling that they're not good enough. And when they learn to sit with themselves and to feel into the sensation of these large emotions, they're able to move them. And it no longer drives their behaviors, which can be then maybe pushing somebody away further, or clinging to them even tighter, or running away and avoiding and escaping. So a lot of the work is self-awareness. It all boils down to that.
So I'm guessing you take your clients through a meditative experience then, where you sit and you guide them through either a self-conversation and breaking down their thoughts and getting to the root of things.
Yeah, every practice or every session that happens, there's some form of embodied practice that has to come into play, because it's very much about learning to be in the moment, and meditation and mindfulness is all about the way that I'm seeing it, and also from the way that it's been studied, is to become an observer and a witness of your own self.
Okay.
Right? And
Yeah.
so with meditation, and whether it's from the East or mindfulness from the West, you're becoming an observer of yourself. How can you change anything? How can you change anything if you're not aware of what it is that you need to change? In order to become aware of what you need to change, you need to be able to become an observer of yourself. When I'm feeling anger, let me pay attention and notice, where is the anger living in my body? Is it in my throat? Is it in my chest? Is it in my hips? What is this emotion if it had a voice?
So that's kind of somatic therapy, where you're feeling
Absolutely.
exactly where the pain is.
We're feeling into the sensation because there's the mind-body connection. Your thoughts are linked to the emotion. The emotion is linked to the sensation. All three of those things then inform what you may do or what you may not do. So if somebody's having a very strong triggered reaction, trauma response reaction to something, the number one thing to stop and do is to drop in and say, okay, I'm experiencing a trigger. Let me drop in and notice where it is. Does it need to say something? What's it communicating to me? Building a relationship with self.
Yeah.
So my clients, that's all that we're doing, is building a relationship to self in all ways.
Sure. I know you mentioned in your personal journey, it was all about taking the mask off. And we all deal with that. Like I personally, I feel like I wear a lot of masks because society calls for it. So how does one start the journey of taking off their mask?
Wow. It's the choice of what became important to me. Is there's a word tattooed on my wrist, which is satya. Satya means truthfulness. And what became very important to me is authenticity. So the people who are coming towards me, they're very interested in living their authentic self because there's no other option. I don't want to live a certain way anymore. So I think it is about having a conversation with yourself of, I wear these masks. Well, let's ask the next question. Why do I wear, and very compassionately, why do I wear these masks? What would happen if I took it off? Who do I think would judge me for taking it off? Who would I be disappointing if I took it off? Am I living? It's all about life is not about the answers. It's about the questions we're not asking. So let's ask ourselves these questions. What would happen if I took it off? Would the world fall apart? Would my life crumble? Would I no longer be able to live in the environment that I'm living in? Would I get a divorce? What would happen? And am I willing to stand in the fire of my own life to get to the truth of who I am?
Yeah.
So the first step is asking yourself this question.
Yeah, and the second
Why?
step is probably coming up with all the courage to do it, right? Because like if you're in a situation, well, will this ruin my marriage? Will I get into
I
have a
can give
divorce?
you a very personal story of
Sure.
the first time where I realized, oh my God, oh my God.
I'd
Okay,
love to hear it. I'm sure I guess I mean our listeners would too.
so I'm Indian. I live in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an Indian radio station called 104.9. It's the Indian radio station.
Mm-hmm.
104.5 was the hip hop station. Okay. I grew
Okay.
up in LA. I love Punjabi music. I love Indian music. I love hip hop.
Uh-huh.
So I was married and I
Mm-hmm.
shared a car with my mother in law.
Mm-hmm.
And I would come home from work and she would take the car every day to go to get fresh groceries.
Mm-hmm.
So I would listen to 104.5,
Mm-hmm.
the hip hop station, on the way home.
Yeah.
And right before I would leave the car to go home,
Mm-hmm.
I would change the station to 104.9. What was I doing? Subconsciously, I was giving her the impression that I was listening to that radio station, but I was
Oh.
not.
Okay.
One day, I had been I was about to get out of the car and I decided to not change the radio station. Now, she never told me to listen to 104.9.
Yeah.
She never told me don't listen to hip hop. This was a self-imposed expectation I had put in myself of what I think a good Indian girl, a good Indian girl, I'm
Yeah.
married, I'm in my 30s, but I'm
Yeah.
still a good Indian girl,
Yeah.
is supposed to do
Uh-huh.
or should present themselves as, though that wasn't the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a decision to not change the station, but in that moment, I had this like download realization of, I hope I can cuss,
No, go for it. Yeah.
shit,
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
If I hide this,
Mm-hmm.
the first question I ever ask myself is, what else am I hiding? If I hide this little thing, and I didn't get out of the car until I answered that question to myself, and take a guess of how long I sat in the car before I got out, and my ex-husband is like staring at me from the door, coming to the window, and I'm like refusing. I'm having a little crisis
Yeah.
with this first question of what else am I hiding? How long do you think I sat in the car?
10, 15 minutes?
No, longer.
Or longer? An hour?
2.5 hours.
Wait, he was waiting outside for you?
Yeah, and I was just like, I'm not getting out of the car. I was crying. I'm saying, what else am I hiding? Gave me this laundry list. I used to hide so many different things. But where did it come from? It came from a lifetime of hiding, childhood on.
So this is basically the story of the drop that makes the kettle overflow, right? Basically,
Correct. It's
yeah.
a straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but it was asking myself this one question.
So now it's very interesting how something that small, because like if someone were to ask me that, or if I was your friend at the moment, I'm actually not a very good friend if I were to have this thought, but if I were to think like that's so small, why would that take you 2.5 hours to come up with? Just don't change the station, right? But I think it's the mentality that you grew up with that basically just it just made you realize like I've been living the wrong life the entire time.
I had been living, it felt like in that moment, it felt like I'm a lie. My whole life is a lie.
And that takes a lot of courage, because that's basically erasing your own past, or even looking back at it like this has all been a mistake. And
Yeah.
to do that, it's amazing, because now what's next? Like
What's next became an existential crisis.
yeah.
A crisis of taking a look at everything. Examination of what is the truth. And I think, the truth, there's a very famous American expression, the truth shall set you free. But there's also the opposite. The truth is the hardest pill to swallow.
Yeah.
So if you can swallow that pill, the outcome of that is freedom and liberation.
Yeah.
And I think that's where all of this came into play of I became a seeker of truth.
Now, the path to truth is unfortunately something I've realized is it's kind of a lonely path, right? So how do you deal with
Why is it
people?
lonely?
It's lonely because the truth shows you the untruths of other people, which then you start to avoid those people because you don't want to, I guess, dirty yourself with their untruths, right? Or it just becomes lonely because people don't want to support you because they think you're wasting your time when you can live so easily just living in a lie, living with a mask.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, the path isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
But there's no judgment on that, right? Like, how beautiful that you have found yourself in this point in existence
Yeah.
to say, like, this is what matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I know from my experience is the more that I've stepped in deeper to this, I've attracted people in my life who also are on a journey for themselves. So it's a soul family, of people who are walking a journey of their own.
Yeah. So, journey of your own kind of triggers me to say, basically, everyone has their own personal truth. Then, right? Not everyone can follow the same truth. We're all individuals.
100%,
Yeah.
my lived experience is completely different than your lived experience, though we come from the same culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even within our own household, the way we were raised, though we come from the same culture,
Yeah.
Hindu Punjabi,
Yeah. Hindu Punjabi.
Hindu Punjabi, Hindu Punjabi,
Yeah.
mother father, mother father.
Yeah.
I guarantee we were raised
Yeah.
with very different families.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what you experienced in your body. Now, of course, there's similarities,
Yeah.
right? But there's also a lot of individual differences that we experienced.
So I guess our traumas stem from, or how we deal with those traumas stems from our environment, right? So how big of a role have you found when you're working with your clients? How big of a role does environment play versus just mindset? Because some people can be in a terrible environment, like those stories you hear about people went from a very poor family, they got up and became like leaders in their wherever they are, right? So they had a strong mindset, but a poor environment. Other people have great environments, but a poor mindset. So what plays a higher role?
Yeah, I can't answer that completely without actually doing some research on it. I
I
don't
see.
know if there's one that becomes more important than the other. I can only speak from my personal experience and from my clients' experience. It's very much been something triggered within them and something triggered within me to say something has to change. So a very personal thing.
Yeah.
Now, for myself, I found that I personally couldn't heal in the environment where the pain and the suffering was existing. And so I had to remove myself and create a space where there was accessibility for me to get into the mindset to heal.
Okay.
Now, you're not wrong because, once a week I work with women who are refugees in the U.S. And I think about the experience that they had and where they were in their conditions and the resilience and the strength that they had to survive that condition. And I also know that the impact of what they were experiencing was killing them softly, killing them silently. And being out of that environment, there's an opportunity now then for them to re-heal, to connect, to thrive. So environment versus individual, hard to say.
I see. No, that's fine. It's again, it's a very complex topic, and you need specific issues, and each specific issue has a specific answer. You can't just paint a
Yeah,
broad
yeah. I think
brushstroke,
it's
right?
like you had said, our truth's individual.
Yeah.
I would say healing is individual too.
Hmm.
Although, knowing what I know about trauma and trauma recovery, the research is phenomenal showing that if trauma has happened in the context of relationships,
Hmm.
the hub of healing becomes relationships. So new attachments can form to create the opposite of trauma
Hmm.
when it's been relational. And that's exciting. That's promising. That's hopeful
Hmm.
that we can heal.
So it's interesting because, like, if I've been in a relationship or even if it's a friendship,
Sure.
if it's traumatic and you move on to a new one, it comes with further attachments. So you're afraid of that. You don't want to attach again. So how do you
So
deal with
this
that?
is the research that's out there is that so many individuals they self-sabotage.
Hmm.
And the research has shown why do they self-sabotage? Because they have a fear of being hurt again, a fear of being abandoned, or a fear of freedom being taken away. So, yes, it is absolutely true
Hmm.
that pain can happen and hurt can happen. And a lot of it becomes that inquiry of self of, let me explore that friendship dynamic. Let me explore, where did it go wrong?
Yeah.
What was my part?
Hmm.
What was their part? And can we see that we're probably two very good people?
Hmm.
We don't have to pin each other as enemies or people who are malicious, although that does exist as well. But if you were friends for a certain period of time, it's honoring that we were friends. And maybe there was something you were getting out of that friendship that was serving you in some way, shape, or form. And as you're moving on to a new friendship, what's wrong with attaching? Attachment is okay from an Eastern perspective.
Yeah.
To love without attachment doesn't mean that we don't attach. To love without attachment, whether it's a friend or a significant other, to love without attachment
Hmm.
means that I know that loss is possible. Because tomorrow may not come, correct? For
Yeah.
anybody, it may not
Exactly.
come for you, it may
Hmm.
not come for me.
Hmm.
So to love without attachment means that I'm going to be completely present
Hmm.
with you and with this experience. I'm going to take responsibility for my emotions,
Hmm.
and this person can take responsibility for their emotions, their triggers, their needs, their boundaries. But if we are not aware of what our needs are in
Hmm.
friendship, if we're not aware of what our boundaries are in friendship, if we're not aware of how to communicate
Hmm.
disappointment or hurt or expectations, then we're not doing the friendship justice.
Hmm.
And there might be this big sense of clinginess that happens or avoidance that
Hmm.
happens. And all of that is a fear of intimacy.
Yeah.
It becomes the fear of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in how do we create more intimacy in dynamics, whether it's friendship or parent to child or lovers or significant others or the labels of
Yeah.
couple.
Now you mentioned boundaries. Now, forgive me for being so ignorant on boundaries because I honestly, personally, maybe it's a personal flaw of mine. I'm not very comfortable with the word boundaries because I've always experienced that when people have put up boundaries or mentioned boundaries for me, boundaries are more like walls.
Sure.
Yeah, and I had this idea that boundary should be a bit more flexible. What is your viewpoint on this?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would tend
Hmm.
to agree with you. I think the word it's gotten a bad rap.
Hmm.
I think it's getting used as when people are putting up a wall, which is a protective mechanism. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism.
Okay.
A wall is a boundary that has become way too tight.
Mm.
And if a boundary is way too tight, then that means nobody's coming in.
Yeah.
Nobody's coming in. And if I'm hearing, oh, nobody's coming in, I'm sensing this is probably what's happening in their nervous system.
Mm.
They're really afraid and they feel like in that moment they need to protect themselves. And it's probably not even about you. It's probably about something else in the past that's reminding them of that, and the boundary has to come up. So a wall is a too tight boundary.
Yeah.
On the opposite spectrum of that, we have boundarylessness, which is where the enabling tendencies happen, or the people-pleasing tendencies seem to happen. So we've got a too loose boundary and a too tight boundary, which then creates no intimacy,
Yeah.
no connection, and no safety. The boundary is actually what creates the safety. A boundary is a beautiful thing. A boundary helps us understand you can't set a boundary if you don't know what your need is. And so what would happen, let's say somebody sets a wall up with you.
Yeah.
What your work could be is to try and understand what is their need. And that might then help them be able to communicate and express to you what the actual need is. And it might sound something like, I'll give you a generic example, right? So when I'm in the kitchen, I like to just cook, and I don't really like somebody coming in to tell me, like, turn the gas low or turn it up or stir things.
Yeah.
A lot of it is like, it makes me feel really nice to cook for somebody and give them a meal.
Yeah.
And if somebody is messing in the kitchen and changing things, it also like changes the dynamic of the speed and the cooking time, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So somebody might come in and start doing that. And I have two options at that point. I could get really angry and like tell them to leave,
Yeah.
or I could set a boundary lovingly. Now, the need is for me to feel like I'm doing it and I'm doing it on my own. And it's something that I have a lot of pride in doing, and it's my way of showing love. And so I can communicate that. Like, it really makes me feel like I'm not staying in my experience. It makes me feel like I'm not doing a good job
Yeah.
if and when you come in and fix things, and it really kind of shuts me down and makes me feel like I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And so I think I need for you to stay out of the kitchen and just enjoy the meal, because that's what would make my heart feel really happy, is when you enjoy the meal. So I'm communicating my need and setting the boundary without saying, like, get out. And I gave a very simple, generic, basic example.
So what happens when you feel like, for example, I typically don't set boundaries with people because I feel like me setting a boundary is going to either push that
them
person
away.
away, or it's going to just have them feel like I don't give them enough importance, right? Because this space is only for certain people in my life, not for you. So I don't want to make them feel bad.
Yeah. Because you're giving this an example, then I'm going to just give you what I would, like, if
Of
you were a
course.
client.
Yeah, of course.
If you were a client of mine sitting in front of me, I'd stop in right there and right then. I'd say, oh, when I hear that, what comes up for me is, it's possible that you might not know that your needs matter. It's possible that you don't have a relationship to your own needs. And that then it's like really clinging or grasping, and you're very afraid of connection being broken.
Yeah.
That's true.
It is, yeah. I tend to get very easily attached to people. So this is why I try to not set boundaries, because boundaries separate people, in my mind at least.
Yeah. And so, like, the work that I would do with you is actually creating a relationship with this concept of boundaries, because you have it as boundaries is bad. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So there's a me that's missing from the equation in your dynamic.
I see.
And that's important to realize. We are not here to self-sacrifice. We are not here to be a martyr, that martyrdom. We are here to love, and to love freely and openly. There's no fears. No fears in the dynamic. The relationship is give and take. We are in each other's lives because we want to be in each other's lives.
Yeah.
We don't have to help everybody, though we might want to. We don't need to help everybody, though we may want to. We want to help those who are willing to accept the help and who want to help themselves.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the journey is about them going through their journey. That is their path to take.
Yeah.
And for us to go in and interrupt that, who are we to do that?
Exactly. And so now when it comes to, let's say, the boundary is mutual, right? Does that come from proper communication, I'm guessing? And so as an intimacy coach, how do you suggest people to have proper communication within their relationships, right?
That takes months upon months of like really sitting with couples and
Yeah.
watching them fight. A lot of it is
Watching them fight. Yeah.
watching them fight.
Yeah.
I literally and some couples, they're not allowed to have certain conversations unless I'm there until they've learned how to do it on their own. And that can take about 6 months. But there's a very specific frame I use. It's a relationship repair frame from the Somatica method. And a lot of it is, one, making sure that you're looking at the person in front of you not as enemy number one. The first thing that happens is when we're in conflict or tension with somebody, we start to see the person as our enemy. And that's the first thing that comes in mind. Secondly, it's how activated or triggered am I? And if I'm above a 3, this conversation doesn't happen. If I'm a 3 or below, okay, we're present enough. Because if I'm trying to have a conversation from a triggered state, who's listening?
Yeah.
Nobody's listening. Or I'm using language that's blaming, shaming, judgmental. You never do this. You don't want to listen to what I have to say. You.
Yeah.
Who's listening? Somebody's going to go into defense mode with that type of language. And then the work becomes about how do you communicate? And I use a very simple formula, and I say simple, but it's very hard. And the simple is, when X happens, I feel Y, and that creates Z. And we continue to practice that again and again and again and again, taking ownership of their experience. And from there, the listener, their only role is to offer empathy. And empathy isn't parroting or mirroring back. Empathy is really taking a moment to say, whoa, if this person is experiencing this, or if they're experiencing me this way, or if they're experiencing whatever, what might they be feeling? What might they be going through? And if it's something in conflict, then the role becomes to take responsibility. You're not wrong. I do ignore you when I feel like I don't matter. That happens. I totally ignore you. You're not wrong. I do try to help you. And sometimes it's when you don't even need help. You're not wrong. I do that.
Yeah.
Taking that responsibility. And then the last step of that whole process is to offer reassurance. Hey, it's not my intention to step on your toes. It's not my intention to ignore you. It's not my intention to make it feel that you don't matter to me. The truth is blah, 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 blah. And then we do something to reconnect. So communication is so many things. It's not just the things that we say. It's also attuning. Am I watching the body language? Am I watching heart rate? Am I watching closed fists? Am I watching the swallows? Am I really seeing the person in front of me? And then slowly doing the opposite of what we've done before to try and create a different way of helping someone feel seen, heard, and validated.
So speaking of validation, now people see validation as such a negative thing, right? They say like, I don't want to validate you, or I don't want to be validated because it's emasculating at sometimes, right? So how important of a role is validating the other person's feeling play in this whole relationship dynamic, right?
I think if we're talking about intimacy, it's everything. We might not know what somebody is going through, but we can still hear them out and see them. And that in itself is validating. Just to let somebody be with their own experience and to express it is validation enough. So if we can learn when we're in dynamic to do that, we don't have to say anything at all. We don't have to, other than letting somebody have their experience.
Yeah. So now I want to move on to like gender roles in
Sure.
intimacy, right? So men tend to hide their emotion. Women either they want to express their emotion or are unable to, or sometimes they're just all out emotion that overwhelms the man.
Mm,
So how do you find the proper balance?
balance.
Yeah.
So some of it is to strip away
Mm-hmm.
the gender roles and to see ourselves, to you, me, your sister, your brother, your lover, your husband, your wife,
Mm-hmm.
as a human being first.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings, and what do human beings have?
Emotions.
We have
Yeah.
emotions. You know, Brene Brown has done some brilliant work, and she has a beautiful book called Atlas of the Heart, where there are 88 keys on the
Mm-hmm.
88 emotions she's identified.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like to simplify that and say on a grand piano, there are 88 keys.
Mm.
There are some black keys, there's some
White keys.
white keys, there's keys that are sharp, there's the flat,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's middle C. And I equivalate middle C to I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But there's this whole range on the piano that gets missed.
Mm.
We are here to have this human experience, and this human experience is 88 emotions and more. And so to recognize that we're human
Mm-hmm.
often can neutralize and make emotions dissipate. And what I've learned from practice as well as the years of training is that the quicker that we can identify an emotion in real time,
Mm-hmm.
it's known that if we can identify the emotion of like, oh, I'm feeling really disappointed right now, access where disappointed is in our body, watch it, observe it. Within 90 seconds or so, it
Mm-hmm.
can go away. So whether you're a male or a female, first and foremost, you're a human.
Mm.
So strip away the gender roles, and maybe that's controversial, but
Yeah.
that's the approach that I come from.
All right, Priya. So I also want to go ahead and talk to you about what are the catalysts that lead to issues in relationships, right? When people come to you, what is the biggest thing that leads to their arguments and dissatisfaction with the relationship?
That's a fantastic question. Resentment.
Mm.
If I'm answering that
Yeah. Yeah.
exact question,
Mm.
resentment is the number one killer of relationships. And it's also the biggest reason why sex stops happening in dynamics
Mm.
is because there's resentment and there's no longer attraction to the partner because there's resentment. So resentment builds from things piling up or from feeling like they communicated but it not really being expressed or heard, not feeling safe in a dynamic, and triggers that become
Yeah.
so large that it almost feels like now this is my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And so resentment becomes one of the biggest reasons why people are struggling in their relationships.
Could a resentment also rise from a change in power dynamics? Because like suddenly like
Absolutely.
someone's job status changed, they're starting to earn more, or because someone just became a mother, they have a more important role now in the family compared to
Yeah, and so there's no shortage of reasons.
yeah.
Those are some
Mm-hmm.
for certain individuals
Yeah.
where resentment might build, but the opposite might be true. Somebody's earning more money, the other partner might be like, yes, I can take a break. So it's very individual,
Okay.
but there's no
So
shortage of reasons.
so how do you tend to work on dissolving this resentment? Like if some quick tips or
I
stuff that
think
people
it's
can use.
really important to look at what's the relationship trigger, where's the pain coming from, what's the wound, and often the trigger is never about the thing that just happened. It's most likely something else that happened either with this person or somebody else, maybe even in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
and really taking a look at like what exactly created this wound that is carrying out The way that I'm able to discern is this a trigger is when the reaction is a lot bigger than what the experience
Yeah,
is. And trigger can build a ton of resentment. Resentment can then build the wall. And so there's communication that's been missed along the way. And so, okay, so tips, it's actually don't let things become a huge big fire. When you notice the small fires, become empowered enough in your relationship to request instead of complain, using the language of, I get the sense that blah, blah, blah. I think I need blah, blah, blah. Like it's like really getting clear of how do you communicate this so that it is heard from the other person? And are you bringing up this conversation when they're tired, right before bed, when they're not really paying attention?
Yeah.
Are you creating containers to have conversations that are important? Do not have conversations over text message. And I don't even recommend them that when they're big, to not have them on phone. If you're going to do them on the phone, at least FaceTime.
Yeah.
Do not have text wars.
I guess texting just creates this shelter that we can hide behind, right? And we can think out our thoughts before we push them out. I mean, I personally, I'll agree to this. I would much rather have a conversation over text simply because it's a bit more, I can think through what I'm saying and not be so reactionary.
Yeah, but here's the thing about texts. There's no body language. There's a lot of interpretation that the other person can't hear tone.
Yeah.
They cannot hear the intent. It's what you've written, how you said it in your voice.
Yeah.
But none of that can be carried across. It's going to be read in their version of you. A lot gets missed. And to me, if I could call you out,
Go for it.
I would say there's a huge possibility that you have a fear of intimacy. There's a huge possibility that there's a fear of intimacy, a fear of abandonment, a fear of your freedom being taken away, or fear of being hurt again. And so that is your protective mechanism, is like, okay, I'm going to text this. And the way it's justified is I've thought out my thoughts. But you probably are then like, there's so much that gets said in this text that people will stop reading. Or they're going to, like I said, read it in their version. And everything gets lost. Khalil Gibran, he's an incredible Sufi poet. And he says, between what is said and not meant, and what is not meant but said, all of love gets lost. What does that mean when you hear that?
The messages between the lines, our emotions, they disappear.
Yeah, that sometimes we're saying things that we don't really even mean.
Yeah.
And it's coming out of like our pain, our wounding, our suffering, our fears of intimacy. And then sometimes we don't mean things, but we say them. And people get really hurt.
Yeah.
So like really trying to respect yourself enough, to respect the other person enough to say, you matter to me and this dynamic matters to me enough that I want to talk about this. I care about us.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about this, and I want to understand. I want to see you. I want to feel you.
Yeah.
And I want you to feel me. I want to be understood.
Yeah.
It creates a whole different dynamic.
Yeah.
And it gets easier and easier and quicker and quicker the more you do it. It's a muscle that you have to flex.
Yeah. No, that's great advice, because I totally need that. Yeah.
Did it land for you?
Oh, it landed.
It's hard to hear.
No. I mean, again, it's openly human, right? I want you to be authentic in teaching me, and I want to be an authentic student, right?
Aw.
So,
Look, I have it too, by the way.
Oh.
I mean, I can be honest about my own like relationship dynamic. You know, I'm in my first relationship after 8 years of being single, 8 years of divorce. And, you know, it took me that long to feel like that afraid of intimacy without even realizing I was afraid of intimacy. Because when people meet me, they're like, oh my God, she's so loving, she's so compassionate, she's so kind, she's so loving. And I am. And I had created a lot of unavailability. Like my schedule was packed, I was physically never available. That was all of my fear of intimacy showing up in a behavior. I mean, my first healthy, quote unquote, relationship a year in, and I'm afraid, and I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, we have to create this like lens of it's possible there's door number one that you get hurt,
Yeah.
but what's door number two?
That all will be well.
Then it's great,
Yeah.
and there's things learned, and there's adventures had, and there's experiences shared, and there's moments
Yeah.
of love and connection. So I kind of like to look at door number two. Door number two.
Yep. So I want to quickly go back to when we were talking about being reactionary and having reactions and arguments. A lot of times people can avoid being reactive, but just because they're such truth lovers and they're like, I want you to know the truth, I want you to know my truth, my facts, that they become reactionary because they feel like they're not being heard. At that point, is it better to stay quiet and let the other person express what they're feeling, or should you bring out the truth and be like, no, you're wrong because you're standing for what's right?
Yeah, if that is happening, nobody's listening. Okay, nobody's listening. So the person who's on the listening end, of course, this is where it becomes such a challenge. They have the hardest job. Their job is to stay present to the experience of the other person while tracking what's happening with them. So let's say you tell me something and I'm like totally livid inside and I disagree and I want to defend myself and I want to tell the other person, no, you have it wrong. Like, hear me out. My point of view, you have it wrong. I am no longer listening to the other person, and connection is already lost.
I see.
It becomes this person's responsibility to track within themselves of like, wow, what this person is saying is getting me to a point where I'm no longer listening. I'm formulating my response in my head. I'm having the need to defend myself. You will get your turn, but it is that person, whoever's sharing vulnerably and authentically first, they have to have the floor. And they have to have the space to feel safe, that it is safe for them to come and express something to you. Because if you're immediately invalidating them and telling them that they're wrong or they have it wrong, you want to know what's happening in their experience and how you feel. And then that you would then go through that process that I was saying, where you want to check with yourself of like, okay, what they're saying to me is putting me above a 3, which means I'm no longer listening. I need to tell them, hey, what you're sharing with me is hard to hear. I need to pause. Let me go take a walk. Let me take some breath. Let me drink some tea. We're not done with this conversation. I care about us. So many people would be like, I can't handle this conversation. I'm out. I'm done. But they fail to say, and when I'm calmed down, we're going to talk about it again. It makes the other person feel abandoned if the other person is leaving. But if we're above a 3, we have to pause because we're no longer listening. So this is how you start the process of staying in your own experience while sharing an experience with the other person. Mindfulness meditation in real time. There's no point in practicing on the mat of let me do meditation, let me do my practice for 15 minutes, let me observe myself, let me calm myself down. But if we can't take that and put it into practical application, especially when we're in conflict with somebody, then meditation is useless to me, for me, my opinion. It's the practical application of what we practice coming into our actual relationship dynamic. And so let's say we've calmed down and we've come back. Then we have to stay in the experience of the other person and listen to them and listen to them. And then when it's our turn, the other person has to track their own experience and let you express. And that's where you then get the opportunity to clear the air. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned vulnerability. So the role of vulnerability is very important because I guess you have to be willing to express yourself and be open to being either understood or not understood, right? But some people have a problem with safety. They don't feel safe.
100%.
So what do you think is the role of vulnerability in dealing with issues when it comes to intimacy?
Yeah, it's definitely I think the majority of people don't feel safe
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable because either they're punished or looked down upon if they share openly, or they feel that it's not really cared or paid attention to, so what's the point?
Yeah.
And the more that we can shift the dynamic and the conversation to vulnerability as an act of strength,
Mm-hmm.
and vulnerability is necessary for intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
then everything changes. And so I agree that it's not safe to be vulnerable with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really creating the containers and the space of where is the vulnerability safe. But when we learn to communicate vulnerably, which is that frame
Mm-hmm.
of when X happens, I feel Y, and it makes me blah, 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 it's incredibly empowered.
Yeah.
It's superpower, of like, I'm not feeling very supported right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear you say that you're no longer going to support me,
Mm-hmm.
then I don't feel very cared for at this moment. And it makes me feel like I can no longer share things with you. And I
Yeah.
don't want that,
No one
right?
does,
Nobody,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
no
So it's
one
like
wants that.
really starting to learn how to use language. Words can separate and divide, but words can also create connection.
Yeah.
And that's what intimacy is. Intimacy is closeness and connection. Intimacy isn't just sex.
Yeah.
Intimacy isn't just, spirituality.
Yeah.
Closeness and connection. And for me, in relationships, whether it's mother father, or father and child, or lover, or caregiver, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
there's only two options. We're either moving towards connection or we're moving towards disconnection. And that becomes a choice.
So Priya, as a closing question, I just want to ask you. This was actually great. I learned a lot. So I just want for our viewers, what's can you I guess name a few things that people can do to just simply bring more happiness into their relationship at the smallest level? Because I know it's a very complicated approach where you have to sit with someone and learn specific issues. But what are a few things that people can just start adapting and do just by listening to us? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things, and I think that's the thing,
Mm-hmm.
is to start really caring about the little things. Little things make such a huge difference, really looking at how can I make this person's world or day a little bit better. I'm complete and whole in myself. This person is complete and whole in themselves. But I want to be here. I want to be in this dynamic. And what is it that's going to bring a smile to their face or make it known to them that they are cared for, loved or cared about?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're making their favorite tea and saying, I wanted to make this for you.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do this thing where people do a check in
Mm-hmm.
once a week with each other on the highs and the lows of the week. It's not the same question of like, how are you? But it's like, I want to know what were the best part of your entire week and what were the hardest parts of your entire week.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you need that you're not really getting from
Mm-hmm.
me? Is there any way that I can support you? What would feel supportive for you?
I see.
So it's checking in and really making it known that people are cared for. And lastly, I think it's about checking in on, are we loving the other person the way that we want to be loved?
Mm.
And that's typically what ends up happening versus checking in and really understanding from the other person on the other end, what is it that they need for them to feel loved? If we are loving them how we want to be loved, or
Hmm.
how we want to be loved, we might be missing the mark unless they have the same need. So that's the biggest piece of
Awesome.
advice
That
that's small but quite big.
Okay, awesome. That was great. So again, thank you so much for being a guest on the Openly Human show. And as I said, this was actually one of the best examples I've seen of someone being openly human. And we both kind of took a part of our mask off publicly in front of everyone. So that was an amazing experience. And I hope this inspires people to like take their own masks off. It's okay to do so. And it's very,
Scary, I know.
but it's very relieving. It's like these masks, even though they're not physical in nature, they are suffocating. And
They
so
create a prison,
yeah,
yeah.
and once you take them off, it's just so relieving. Yeah.